There comes a moment, a quiet, powerful moment, when you stop looking outward and finally turn inward, a moment when you stop asking, why did they leave, and begin asking, why did I let myself stay so small just to keep someone close? That moment is sacred. It's not loud or dramatic, it's not fueled by revenge, it's born from clarity, from the deep soul-level realization that you are the one you've been waiting for. When you finally value yourself, not just on paper but in practice, everything changes. And most importantly, the way people treat you changes. You're no longer invisible, you're no longer someone who begs for consistency, you become the standard. You see, people don't disappear when you're strong in your worth. They disappear when they know you haven't seen it yet. They vanish because they know they can. But when you finally stand in your truth, when you stop negotiating your value for scraps of affection, something powerful happens. You don't just change the way you feel, you change the energy you radiate. You send a message without saying a word. I know who I am now. I will not be abandoned again, not by anyone, especially not by me. You stop settling for potential and start requiring proof, and that becomes one of the most powerful shifts in your life. For so long, you may have lived in the idea of what could be, the fantasy, the vision, the possibility of who someone might become or how things might turn around if only you were patient enough, loving enough, or willing enough to wait. You gave chances, you overlooked inconsistencies, you told yourself, but I see something in them. And yes, maybe you did. Maybe there was something real beneath the surface, but the truth is, potential without action is nothing more than a story we use to avoid letting go. When you settle for potential, you become emotionally invested in someone's future while sacrificing your present. You excuse the gaps, you fill in their emotional absences with hope. You tell your friends they're just going through something or they're not ready yet, while quietly burying your own needs just to keep the peace. But with time, that hope becomes heavy, and eventually you wake up to the pain of it. The pain of waiting on someone to grow while you keep shrinking to fit the version of love they're capable of giving right now. That's not love, that's emotional self-abandonment, but then something shifts. You start getting honest. You start measuring not just what someone could be, but what they're actively choosing to be right now. You begin to realize that love is not about potential. It's about alignment. It's about patterns. It's about consistency. You stop listening to words and start watching behavior. You begin to understand that someone's future growth is not your responsibility to manage or wait for. If someone isn't ready to love you properly now, you no longer convince yourself to stick around hoping they'll figure it out. You stop fantasizing and start observing, and what you see becomes the truth you stand on. Not what you wish could happen, but what is happening. This kind of clarity is liberating. Suddenly, the red flags aren't just warnings. You treat them as final answers. You don't stay to see if someone will change. You let them change, without you needing to suffer in the process. You no longer chase emotionally unavailable people. You no longer make excuses for someone else's emotional immaturity. You don't keep giving to prove you're worthy of being chosen. You understand that your presence is not a prize for someone to grow into. It's a gift that must be met with readiness and respect right now. So instead of pouring your energy into fixing, waiting, hoping, or healing someone else, you bring all of that energy back to you. You set a new standard. You build your life around what's real, not what's promised. You open your heart only to those who show up with consistent actions, not charming words. And that's when everything begins to change. Not because people suddenly become better, but because you stopped settling for almost and started requiring actual. You no longer fall for potential, you rise for proof. You stop chasing attention and start attracting respect. And with that shift, your energy becomes undeniable. For a long time, you may have confused attention with affection, thinking that if someone looked your way, responded to your messages, or gave you a glimpse of warmth, it meant they cared. You craved those little signs, those moments of acknowledgement, and sometimes you worked hard to get them, changing how you showed up, suppressing your needs, even pretending to be okay just to avoid being too much. You shaped yourself to stay visible in their eyes, fearing that without the effort you might be forgotten or replaced. But attention that must be chased is always fragile. It's short-lived, unpredictable, and emotionally expensive. It leaves you waiting, overanalyzing, and feeling less than enough. The truth is, when you chase attention, you train yourself to settle for breadcrumbs, to confuse momentary connection with deep presence. And slowly you begin to lose the most sacred part of yourself, your self-respect. Because deep down you know love shouldn't have to be earned through effort that only goes one way, then something within you changes. You get tired of being on stand, tired of shrinking, tired of giving so much for so little in return. And in that tiredness, you begin to wake up. You begin to value respect over attention. You begin to want something quieter but deeper, an energy that says, I see you, I hear you, and I'm here because I choose to be, not because you begged for me to notice. And in that moment, you stop chasing, and your energy begins to pull inward, not in withdrawal, but in alignment. You no longer need to be flashy, loud, or extra to be seen. You just are, and who you are, when you are rooted in self-worth, commands attention without needing to demand it. When you attract respect, you're not performing, you're embodying. You don't beg for validation. You live in such a way that people notice your presence even in silence. They respect your boundaries, your time, your emotional space, not because you threaten to walk away, but because you no longer overextend to prove your place in their life. You let your peace, your confidence, and your clarity speak for you. This shift is powerful because it frees you from the emotional roller coaster of chasing what you were always worthy of receiving freely. It teaches you that respect is not loud. It doesn't always come with fireworks, but it comes with consistency, presence, and care. And when you stop running after the temporary high of attention, you start creating the conditions for something lasting. You no longer attract people who just want access to your energy. You attract those who want to honor it. You don't just want to be seen anymore. You want to be valued, and that begins the moment you stop proving your worth and start walking in it. Because when you finally believe you're enough as you are, the right ones will never make you beg to be seen. You stop overgiving and start receiving, and that's when everything begins to balance. For so long, you may have built your identity around being the giver, the one who always shows up, always says yes, always extends themselves beyond what is healthy or sustainable. You believed that if you gave more, loved harder, tolerated longer, then maybe, just maybe, you'd finally be loved the way you deserved. You offered your time, your emotional labor, your forgiveness. Even when it wasn't earned, you kept giving because you thought your love had to prove itself in sacrifice. But overgiving is often rooted in a hidden wound, the belief that your love must be earned through self-abandonment. And while giving can be beautiful when it's one-sided, it becomes draining. It becomes a transaction where you keep depositing value, but the emotional bank never fills. You give without being asked. You give even when you're running on empty, and often you give not because they deserve more, but because you fear receiving less, and that becomes a cycle, a quiet pattern of chasing connection through exhaustion. Then one day you stop, not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but because you finally realized that love doesn't grow where only one person is watering the soil. You begin to understand that healthy relationships thrive on reciprocity. You don't need to prove your love through constant sacrifice. You don't need to stretch yourself thin to feel secure. You realize that your worth is not measured by how much you give, but by how you allow yourself to receive what you deserve. When you start receiving, you begin to attract a different kind of energy, one that respects your time, your boundaries, your capacity. You learn to pause before saying yes. You ask yourself, am I giving out of love or out of fear? You start letting people meet you halfway or not at all. You no longer pour into people who hand you an empty cup. You stop seeking validation through how much you do. Instead, you start asking, do they show up for me the way I show up for them? This shift rewires your nervous system. You start feeling safe saying no. You rest without guilt. You accept support without explaining yourself. And most importantly, you start believing that you are worthy of receiving love that feels easy, balanced, mutual. You create space for people to give to you, and the ones who belong in your life will rise to meet you there. This isn't about withholding love, it's about loving wisely. You no longer overgive to feel secure. You give when it's healthy, received and returned. You become someone who no longer sees boundaries as barriers, but as bridges to healthier connection, and that's when you begin to thrive. Because when you stop draining yourself to keep others full, you realize love doesn't have to cost you everything to be real. The love that's right for you will nourish, not deplete. It will flow both ways, and that's what you are always worthy of. You stop doubting your intuition and start trusting your inner truth, and that's when you become unshakable. For far too long, you may have second-guessed yourself, wondering if you were being too sensitive, too emotional, too much. You felt things deeply, noticed the shifts, caught the contradictions. But instead of honoring those inner warnings, you silenced them. You convinced yourself to stay, to wait, to see how it plays out. Not because you didn't know the truth, but because you were afraid of what it would mean to act on it. Doubting your intuition became a form of emotional survival. If you didn't trust yourself, you could delay the discomfort of walking away. But that delay always came with a cost. Your peace, your self-respect, your inner alignment. When you doubt your intuition, you trade your inner guidance for external noise. You start depending on other people's words to override your own reality. You believe what they say even when their actions tell a different story. You rationalize away the red flags. You ignore the pit in your stomach, the ache in your chest, the voice in your soul that whispers, "This isn't right." And every time you silence that voice, you drift further from your power. But then one day you stop ignoring it. You stop outsourcing your truth. You sit with yourself and listen, not to the fear, not to the fantasy, but to the quiet knowing that's been there all along. And it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's a subtle unease, a discomfort you can't explain, a feeling that something isn't aligned even if it looks perfect on the surface. And when you begin to trust that, you step into a whole new version of yourself. One that no longer needs permission to feel what she feels, one that no longer asks for validation before honoring her truth. Trusting your intuition doesn't mean you always have the full answer. It means you trust your body to know when something is off, even if your mind hasn't figured it out yet. It means you stop forcing yourself to stay in places that your soul is asking you to leave. It means you move, not because you have all the facts, but because your peace matters more than your fear of being wrong. And more often than not, you'll discover that your first feeling was the truth. Once you start living this way, people feel the difference. You're not easily manipulated. You don't need long conversations to explain what you already know. You're no longer available for emotional confusion. You move with clarity, you protect your space, and you let your inner wisdom lead even when it's hard, because you've learned that nothing outside of you will ever be more honest than what's inside of you. And that kind of trust, it builds a life you can actually feel safe in. A life where your peace is no longer sacrificed for the sake of keeping someone else comfortable. A life that's built on truth, not fear. You stop clinging and start creating space, and that's when true clarity enters your life. When you're afraid to lose someone, it's easy to cling, to hold on tightly, to overcommunicate, to fill every gap with your presence so they won't forget you. You try to be available, to stay relevant, to always be around, just enough that they remember your worth. But clinging doesn't create connection. It creates pressure. It signals insecurity, not strength. And deep down, you know this. Every time you overextend, every time you try to control the outcome through proximity, it chips away at your peace, and theirs too. The fear of creating space often comes from the belief that distance will make them forget you, that if you pull back, they'll disappear entirely. But here's the truth. If distance makes them forget, they were never truly invested to begin with. Space doesn't push the right people away. It reveals them. It shows you who is willing to step forward without being chased. It allows alignment to surface. It separates the emotionally available from the ones who only stay close when you're doing all the work. When you create space, you don't lose anything real. You just stop carrying what was only pretending to be real. Creating space is not passive, it's intentional. It means choosing your peace over your panic. It means stepping back, not to manipulate, but to observe. It gives you room to breathe, to feel, to reconnect with yourself outside of their influence. And that reconnection is where your clarity comes from. You begin to notice your own needs again. You remember what you deserve. You stop moving through the relationship on autopilot, hoping things will change. You pause, and in that pause, you gain the insight to know what's real and what's just been fueled by your fear of letting go. And what happens when you stop clinging? You gain your power back. You're no longer holding something together out of desperation. You're allowing the relationship or the person to show you what it truly is. You become receptive instead of reactive. You stop micromanaging emotions that don't belong to you, and you begin to attract different energy. People sense when you are no longer emotionally dependent on their presence. They feel the difference when you are grounded instead of grasping. That kind of space transforms everything. It clears out the noise, it filters out the confusion, it gives you enough emotional distance to ask the question, is this connection feeding me or just keeping me emotionally occupied? You start making decisions from truth, not fear. You stop accepting proximity as a substitute for partnership. You let silence speak louder than words, and from that silence you hear your own voice again. The voice that tells you you're enough, whether they stay or not. And that voice is the one you follow forward. You stop making excuses for others and start standing up for yourself. And that's the moment you reclaim your dignity. When you deeply care about someone, it's easy to rationalize their behavior. You say things like, they're just busy, they didn't mean it like that, or they're going through a lot right now. You become an expert at justifying the inconsistency, the emotional absence, the broken promises. And the more you do it, the more you convince yourself that your standards are too high or your needs are too much. But slowly and quietly, something inside of you starts to wear down. Your self-trust, your voice, your confidence. Making excuses becomes a coping mechanism. It allows you to stay in a situation that your heart knows isn't serving you. It keeps the illusion alive that someday things will shift if you're just patient enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough. But what that really does is push your own truth further into the background. You end up prioritizing their comfort over your own pain, and you start losing touch with the version of yourself that once had clear boundaries, clear needs, and the courage to enforce them. Then comes the shift. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, like a slow awakening. You start hearing your inner voice again, the one that says that wasn't okay, the one that's been whispering, you deserve more than this. You begin to realize that love doesn't mean tolerating emotional neglect, that compassion doesn't mean allowing repeated hurt, that loyalty doesn't mean abandoning yourself just to keep someone close. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean yelling, fighting, or proving your pain. It means calmly choosing yourself even when it's uncomfortable. It means drawing a line and letting your boundaries be known without guilt. You don't need to explain over and over why something hurt you. If someone can't understand it the first time, or chooses not to, then your role is no longer to teach them how to love you. It's to protect yourself from repeated harm. You begin to realize that self-respect is not selfish, it's survival. And as you start honoring your truth, everything around you starts to shift. You stop attracting people who test your limits and start drawing in those who honor them. You no longer fear being too much, because you finally see that the right person will never ask you to be less. You speak your truth, not because you're trying to keep someone from leaving, but because you're no longer willing to leave yourself behind. You don't make space for people who don't make space for you, and that's not bitterness, that's alignment. It's choosing peace over potential, truth over illusion, and self-worth over temporary comfort. When you stop making excuses for others and start standing for yourself, you stop chasing love and start embodying it. When you finally choose to value yourself, you stop operating from a place of fear and start living from a place of self-worth. You no longer wait for others to validate your existence because you've done the inner work to see your own value clearly. You understand now that your presence is a gift, your love is a strength, and your peace is not up for negotiation. You're no longer trying to be enough for someone who never saw your worth. You've become someone who no longer settles for being half loved. That shift is the turning point. That is where power is reclaimed. In choosing yourself, you stop tolerating emotional chaos as a normal part of love. You no longer make excuses for being mistreated or misunderstood. You no longer chase attention that comes and goes like the wind. Instead, you sit in your truth, steady and clear. You allow space for people to show you who they are, and you believe them. You've learned that consistency speaks louder than chemistry, that peace is more powerful than passion alone, and that your intuition is not something to silence but something to follow. You no longer fear the silence or distance. You know what you bring, and you're no longer afraid to walk away when it's not being honored. The moment you begin to live like this, the world around you changes. People sense your shift. They notice the boundaries, the strength in your voice, the way you no longer explain yourself away. Those who once pulled you close and pushed you away now feel the absence of your energy, and it stings, but you no longer view that sting as your responsibility. You've learned that if someone disappears when you rise, they were never built to stay. They weren't aligned with this higher version of you. The one who finally understands her worth cannot be negotiated, only recognized. You don't need revenge, you don't need a dramatic ending, you need peace. And peace comes when you no longer betray yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You don't fear being alone anymore because you've filled the space within you that used to ache for attention with self-respect. You've stopped begging, explaining, waiting. You've stopped trying to fit into someone else's version of love and started creating your own standard. The people who are meant to be in your life will meet you there, not out of obligation, but because they see you and they respect you. So let this be the season where you rise, not to be seen, but because you finally see yourself. Let this be the version of you who no longer waits for love to arrive but embodies it first. Let this be the version who understands that when you finally value yourself, the ones who were never sure about you will either rise or disappear. And either way, you win, because you're not afraid to let go anymore. You've already come home to yourself, and that's the love story that matters most. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Thank you for showing up for yourself, for listening, for reflecting, for taking one more powerful step toward becoming the version of you that doesn't beg to be chosen, but boldly chooses herself. Your time, your heart, and your healing journey matter, and I'm deeply honored to be part of that process, even in a small way. Remember, the moment you start valuing yourself, everything shifts. You're no longer chasing love. You're attracting truth. You're no longer asking to be seen. You're standing in your own light. And the people who are meant to walk with you won't disappear when you rise. They'll recognize your growth and rise with you. That's the power of alignment. So as you move forward, keep choosing your peace. Keep protecting your energy. Keep trusting your intuition. You don't need to overprove, overgive, or overstay in places that don't honor your heart. You are more than enough exactly as you are, and when you live from that truth, you become magnetic to everything that's real. If this message touched you, please carry it with you and return to it anytime you need to be reminded of your strength. You deserve love that's not confusing, not conditional, but consistent and clear, starting with the love you give to yourself. Until next time, take care of your heart, stay rooted in your worth, and never forget, the most powerful relationship you'll ever have is the one you build with yourself. Thank you and goodbye for now.